this is roughly the time schedule for the session today. So we'll look at 3 sort of short sessions of challenges in terms of data management that the projects typically deal with and solutions that various projects have been implementing, and in between we'll have interactive questions and answers. So we'll look at challenges of data management in a multi-country project and the differences that you face across projects, data security, transfer, storage, and sharing of data, and then capacity building in data management across a partnership and working with partners with limited data management capacity. And usually each project will face all of these challenges simultaneously. So it's a bit of an artificial division probably to focus on these 3 topics, and some of the presentations will probably cover across the 3 topics, but it gives us a bit of a structure. Once that is finished, we'll take a short break whilst Jay divides us all into the breakout groups. You can go and have a cup of tea and then come back, and then there's a 30-minute breakout, and we end with the joint session again where we wrap up and share some of the messages that came out of the discussions. Bit of housekeeping. The easiest is probably during presentations that you mute yourself and keep your cameras off, except of course for the speakers. They shouldn't mute themselves. If there's audio problems, check on your audio settings. You can also leave the meeting, join it again, and make sure you join with your computer audio. If there's any questions or comments you want to make in between, there's a chat functionality that we'll keep an eye on. Also, if in between you have very specific questions for some of the speakers, you can add those in the chats. We'll obviously share all of the slides afterwards, and a report will be written up and shared with the group as well. And I'm trying to get rid of some annoying admin things that keep on popping up on my screen. It's gone now. Okay. And Jay will be in charge of all the technical aspects, monitor the chats, make sure that we end up in the right breakout groups, etc. As said, we'll be using Mentimeter for some interactive Q&A. You can either do that on the laptop or computer you're on. You can already go to that website, www.menti.com, and then you need to type in the code 723485. You see it at the top of the screen. You can also use your mobile phone, so that way you can use it on the side, the Mentimeter, whilst on your screen you can follow the Zoom session. Otherwise, you'll have to switch back and forth between the Zoom and the Menti session. You'll notice that the entire presentation I've actually included into Mentimeter. Makes it easier for me to work through all of that. It's only when there's questions that require specific answers that obviously you can type something into that. Sometimes it's you select from a range of selections, or sometimes you can put in a free code text. Questions will be launched, and then you can submit your response, and the results will be visual in the Zoom session again. So that's why it might be handy if you have a mobile phone to use that for the Menti. Otherwise, it's just a matter of going off to Menti, coming back to the Zoom session to see what the responses are across the entire group. So let's give that a go. So here's the first question. Let's test it. Zoom sessions in lockdown are, and you need to decide which visual represents Zoom meetings in lockdown for you. So let's see whether we achieve 40 responses. Oh, it's mostly cats. It seems. Lots of cats and bookcases. Responses are still coming in. Excellent. So you go to menti.com, www.menti.com, and then the code is the one at the top, 723485. Excellent. So we'll move to the next question. So this was a tryout, so it seems to work for most people.
Can you please repeat the codes?
723485. I assumed you would see it on the screen as well. Apologies.
I see it now, sorry.
Yeah, 3485. And I can see 37, 38 people have responded, so it seems to work for everyone. Excellent. Yeah. Let's move to the next one. Next one is a free text one. In which countries does your project carry out research? So you can submit as many countries as you want. And we get a nice word cloud there, lots of projects in. Let's see, India seems to be the most common, Bangladesh, Colombia, but we have a wide range of countries shown there. I'll leave you another minute to type in some more responses, because responses are still coming in. Excellent. That's a very diverse range of countries we all work in. Next question, how many partner organizations in developing countries or low-income countries participate in your project? So for most people, it seems to be lots of partners typically participating in a project, 5 and more. Excellent. Yeah, so 50% of projects have 5 or more partners, others have 4 or 3. And that was the last of the tryout intro questions. We'll now move on to the various presentations, and we're nicely on time, so that's excellent. So first on, challenges of data management in multi-country projects and the difference across countries, including ethics. And we'll start with Mark Fowler of the PVEC project. And Mark, I'll move through your slides. You just give me a hint when you want me to move on.
Okay, will do. Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Fowler. I'm data manager for the Partnership for Increasing the Impact of Vector Control, or PVEC, which is a MRC GCRF funded project based in the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And so yeah, this is going to be just 5 minutes on the challenges of data management in multi-country projects using what we've learned within PVEC. So just to contextualize this, as I said, PVEC is a partnership for increasing the impact of vector control, which is a partnership to reduce the burden of vector-borne diseases, so malaria, dengue, etc., for effective, locally appropriate, sustainable vector control. So we're working with 5 institutions in 3 African countries, all of which have very high burdens of vector-borne diseases. And they are Burkina Faso, Cameroon, and Malawi. And the aim of PVEC is to generate new knowledge and tools, strengthen research capacity, and reinforce links between researchers and policymakers to reduce the burden of vector-borne diseases. So this is all about reducing the burden of vector-borne diseases while strengthening capacity. And if we can move on, please. Thank you. So the challenges, when it comes to the challenges of data management in multi-country projects, what we've learned with PVEC is that we face particular challenges regarding data access and ownership, and that's due to the project being multi-country, multilingual, but also because it contains many substreams. So these are basically questions about how can all the stakeholders in PVEC get equity of access, and also how do we track what data we have. So these are sort of problems that every project has, but are particular to multi-country projects or any project where you have individuals away from the main site towards that similar. Moving on. So how we've tried to solve these challenges. To summarize, we've implemented 2 major data management systems, and they are firstly to centralize all storage. So we're using SharePoint, and the idea of that is that it gives equity of access, security, and data backup and recovery for every stakeholder. But most importantly, it gives instant access to the most recent version of all files for all members. The second data management system we've implemented is to use metadata records. So we're storing data about what data we have. And the idea behind this is that it's giving us oversight. So we're documenting who has what data, where, and why. And this enables us to track what we've got and to find data, to identify owners, and all those type of processes. And we can do that from one point of reference. So that's PVEC and the challenges of data management in multi-country projects.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mark. It's really interesting
to
hear. Then I believe we have a presentation from Kristen.
Hi, yes, yes, sorry, I think I only sent my slides through earlier this morning, so I'm really sorry.
I missed those, no problems.
really sorry. But to be honest, I don't think we need slides anyway. So
okay.
All fine. So just very briefly, my name is Kristen Meager, and I work in a hybrid role with the Research for Health and Conflict program as a researcher and project manager. I'm based at King's College in London. And our project is also funded by UKRI and GCRF project. And the objective of the R4HC MENA project is to build research and policy capacity, specifically in conflict-affected areas. So we focus on health and conflict, as the title does suggest. And we have 4 workstream packages within that. So that's political economy of health and conflict, mental health and conflict, cancer and palliative care and conflict, and also a more general conflict and health work stream as well. So we work with 7 academic partners. At King's College is the lead partner, and then we also work with Imperial College, Cambridge, and the American University of Beirut, which is in Lebanon, the King Hussein Cancer Center in Jordan, and Hashatapi University in Turkey, and Birzeit University in Palestine. And just briefly, building on what Mark said before, to be completely honest, I don't think there's a huge amount that we can add to that, because I think a lot of those challenges we do share as well. And a lot of what we've tried to do is around sort of managing the different understandings and expectations of why data management is so important. And I think that has definitely been a really big challenge for us, in the fact that some of our partners don't necessarily don't necessarily have any legislation in place for that as well. So a part of our role early on was actually looking through country-specific legislation, as well as policies and regulations in place at the different institutions as well, and trying to build on that. So that was a really good starting point. It was quite time-consuming activity, but definitely worth it. And then we've engaged with all of our partners on how to actually build a strong data management plan that has all of their buy-in and their engagement as well. And we also use SharePoint, which I think Mark had mentioned as well, and that's been a really great tool. However, it's not well utilised, and I think a lot of people do still have a tendency to use other things like Google Drive and those sorts of things. However, we have put a policy in place around it. And again, I think, yeah, we are still having challenges implementing that. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at with that. Sorry, I haven't got the slides for everyone to have a look at, but more than happy to discuss this a bit further.
Excellent, thank you very much, Kristen. Sorry, I realized I could have asked you to share your screen, but
actually, yeah, I probably could have done it as well. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'll blame it. I'll blame it all the time.
I'll make sure we include them later on in the write-up and the report and everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just checking. I don't think any questions have come in as such, so we'll move on to the Menti questions. Let's check. Okay, so back over to everyone responding on this. Who owns the data in your research project? Is it each partner owns the data that they collect or they work with? Is it a partnership collectively? Is it the PI institution that owns the data that get collected? Maybe you haven't decided it, or maybe you don't know. Okay, and what is the partnership collectively owns the data? Or we don't know, or I don't know in your role on the project, or each partner owns the data they collect. So a nice division between those three options. I'm just checking because there's a chat. Yes, we're referring to primary data here. Yeah, that was one of the questions. Yeah, obviously, if you're using secondary data, then you don't. Then whomever they belong to would have owned them. Okay. Move on to the next question. There's some statements on research ethics, and I would like you to score your agreement or disagreement with the statements on using consent forms in your projects, because that came out of the survey, that there's a lot of grappling with ethical issues in projects that work with people. So the statements are: using consent forms in social research reflects Western values that are meaningless in the societies where we do research. Research participants are reluctant to sign a form. Signing a consent form may pose a risk for research participants. Power dynamics between researchers and community makes consent meaningless, and informed consent is more meaningless at the level of the community, village leaders, our family, than at the individual level. And you can also skip if you feel that it's not for you to respond to the questions. You can skip individual questions, or you can obviously skip all of this, all of the questions, and you use the sliding bars to score, and then you submit. So take your time, we're not in a rush to give responses to that. The responses seem to hover all in the middle. No strong agreement, no strong disagreement. Okay, I think most people have responded. So that's interesting to see that they're all sort of on the middle rather than strong agreements or strong disagreements or some of these statements. Good. This is progressing faster than I thought we would. So we're slightly ahead of time. So if people have got questions for speakers, then please submit them via the chat and we can handle them. Let's see. There is some responses here in the chat.
There's a...
would be interested to know more from Mark about metadata records. So Mark, is there something you want to say about that? We've got time still.
Yeah, sorry, I was just in the middle of writing something actually. Yeah,
Sorry.
so what we do is we do annual data collections, and it is difficult to get responses, and it is a lot of work tracking people down. But you need buy-in from PI, and once you've got that, geeing people along, then it does speed things up. From previous sort of projects, what I've found is it's difficult to get the metadata throughout the project, but then at the end, when there's an incentive and people are looking for lots of data, that's when all these metadata records can get filled in, because there's an incentive to do it at that point.
Okay, there's another question related to that, which is how many of the data owners or academics complete the metadata info as required?
Yeah, it is like I just said, it is difficult to get buy-in. But once if the PI understands the need for it and is communicating that to the researchers, then it does make it a lot easier. And also, when it gets to the end point and people realize why they're actually doing it, that's when it becomes much easier.
Yeah. Okay, and there's another comment on that saying, from Alistair Stewart, I came into the project late when many partners already had collected a lot of their own data and now looking to reach agreement with them on centralizing it.
Sorry, was that a question for me?
It's not a question, it's more a comment, I think, again.
Oh, okay.
So looking at to reach agreement with them on centralizing it, and yes, that's never it's always a bit of a chase trying to get academics to provide information. There's also during the discussions, you'll see that there's a question asking whether there's any useful resources that you got in your project that you think might be worth sharing with other projects, so we can learn from each other, and maybe Mark, an example or a template of your metadata record might be useful for other projects to get to see. You know, we can use each other to share experiences that help.
Yeah, because I just use a metadata a template that I've used previously and then just redesign it for the current purposes. So I can upload that. Yeah.
There's another question for you, Mark. Any comparable issue for Mark with partners using Google Drive rather than SharePoint as centralized solution?
The problem we have is it's more to do with internet access and a steady access to the internet. And especially when there's people who've got large files like audio files, etc.
Yeah.
And that's just the problem. It just can't be solved. So you have to have workarounds like that. You have to ensure that they are doing their own backups.
Yeah. How do you get your external partners to access your SharePoint that you set up? Do you give them institutional
we've got
access
both.
accounts?
So the sort of main researchers have got institutional accounts so they can sync with their Drive, but there are other sort of stakeholders that just have what they call they're just like external members.
Okay.
So they can access through a browser and access all the files through that.
Yeah. Question from Richard Doyle. What is the incentive to complete records at the end of the project, those metadata records?
Well, the incentive is that it's when they are sort of collecting for papers and trying to actually turn all this data they've collected into some output. And at that point, when people are looking for data, especially when especially the PI and other sort of major sort of like project managers, etc., when they're involved in that process, then it's the incentive is just makes their life much easier. And I think if you're working with people who've been on many projects in the past, I think there is, especially nowadays, an understanding of why you want to organize your data and why you want to be able to access your data easily. So it is a battle, but it's not too difficult.
Okay. Do all of the project partners and external stakeholders have access to the metadata is another question. Sorry, they keep coming.
It depends. So we've got levels of access because some of the data files may or may not have your personal sensitive data in the titles, etc. So we control the levels of access to
the metadata.
Yeah.
So some might be accessible to all, some might be to groups.
Yeah, exactly. And we turn them into Power BI dashboards for certain users, so then they can just interrogate it really easily. Okay.
Good. There's another comment here. Nick Shepard saying Africa is using glass cubes. Team are very positive about that. Right. We're actually also using that for our project, the Drugs and Disorder project, and that's thanks to Jay, who had started using that. And when I joined, we checked that it was GDPR compliant, etc., ISO information standards compliant, which is the case. So yeah, using that to share data, and it's indeed very, very user-friendly to set up. I'm seeing whether there's other comments before we move on to the next. We've got a few more minutes. Some people here say we use Basecamp and SharePoint. That's Diego. Glass cubes apparently better than SharePoint for low bandwidth. I think that's our experience as well. Plus, it does allow some editing within. Well, SharePoint does that as well, I guess. So you can edit within documents. Angela Mehta saying we use glass cubes for collaboration, and then OneDrive via the PI institution for research data to comply with the institutional requirements. So we've moved into the next session actually already, which was on data security, transfer, storage. Everyone's talking about that already, which is good. Data access. Okay, so let's move on to the next topics then. So that's data access, data security transfer, storage and sharing across partners and also more widely or publicly. And we start with Ross coming from the Non-in3 project. Let me just progress with the slides. Over to you, Ross.
Thank you very much, Veerle, and to Jay as well for hosting this event. It's quite a feat. I'm very impressed that you've done this alongside everything else that everyone's got going on. Yeah, don't know already, Non-in3 takes its name from the global statistic that 1 in 3 women and girls is subject to physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. So that's the statistic that we exist to try and address and reduce to none in 3. Our project involves mixed methods research, which results in developing pro-social computer games as educational interventions to prevent violence. And we conduct randomized control trials on those games, although COVID has put a somewhat of a spanner in the works for that final part of the project, but we're still hoping to do that before we finish. So that's a bit of background. Veerle, if you're okay to just move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Apologies for the slightly text-heavy slide. This was done originally as some very kind of a bit of a brain dump, and I probably should have refined it a little bit, but not to worry. So yeah, I mean, the things I'm highlighting do, as Veerle said at the start, they do kind of cut across some of these categories, and I would certainly echo some of the challenges and solutions that both Mark and Kristin have raised. One of the things that I wanted to highlight first off was what would seem like a quite a simple task of collecting hard copy surveys, collecting that sort of data. When you're trying to do that in an international context with large numbers, which we have, that presents a bit of a logistical challenge. So we conducted paper surveys in booklets with, we were aiming for 10,000 young people in each country. So in the end, we collected in the region of about 35,000 surveys across the project. So fantastic that we got all this great data to work with, but actually then getting it back to the UK, which was the plan in order to do the kind of collaborative analysis and reporting on that data, did present some challenges. You know, 11,000 plus surveys coming from Uganda. That's quite a lot of boxes, and it's quite a lot, well, quite expensive as well, to ensure that you're going to get it transported securely, because of course this is the, you know, the gold dust of the project, isn't it? It's the data that everything else is founded on. So that has been a challenge. We did end up using DHL. We were back and forth with quote after quote to make sure that we were getting value for money, and looking for reassurances, obviously, that it was going to be, you know, managed very, very carefully, because it's not like you can just replace it if it goes missing. The storage of that when it got back to Huddersfield was also an issue, because we have limited space on campus. We ended up having to take over a lockable room in our office building temporarily until the data could be entered into the software where it was going to be analysed. After it had been entered, we've taken the approach using careful inventories of, you know, hard copies, what's been data entered, and then sending it to a secure offsite scanning service so that we can have the data scanned, so that we don't need to keep the boxes and boxes of hard copy surveys for a long period, because we simply don't have the physical space to do that. And again, COVID has somewhat got in the way of that, because data entry hadn't been completed at the point when lockdown happened here. Yeah, we've now got a situation where we're having to enable data entry to continue, but people doing that from home, and then trying to keep track of boxes of data that are at different people's houses. So yeah, I can see some questions popping up. Should I respond to them just now, or don't know if you have a view on that? Couldn't we?
Yes, sure. Sorry, I was muted. Yeah.
Don't worry. So Chris is asking, couldn't you scan in advance of dispatch? Do you? There simply weren't the facilities, I don't think, within the study countries to ask them to do that. I know that, I mean, coming back to the question of data ownership is an interesting one, actually. So the way that our project is set up is that we have a number of work packages which are all led by UK academics, or in the majority, sorry, are led by UK academics. And we have country teams led by co-investigators who are responsible for implementing the research on the ground. And the idea is that we have this kind of collaborative and equitable approach to then analysing and reporting on the data. But in terms of ownership of the data and leadership of the specific aspects of the research, I think because the view was they were being led by the UK academics, they needed to be here and they needed to be done by them. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that's certainly the sense that I get from the academics that we're working with on the project. So I suppose also that's the reason for not having data entry in country, because there was a sense that that needed to be managed by the academic leading on that particular area of work within the UK. Moving on then to data storage and sharing. A few people have been talking about different systems they've used. We were using SharePoint to start with, and found, I think, as Kristen said, that it was underused. People weren't accessing information on SharePoint sufficiently, whether that was because they had access issues or because they found it a little bit clunky or what, I'm not sure, but we ended up switching over and we did investigate glass cubes, I think following a recommendation from some of yourselves at an earlier meeting. In the end, because of cost issues and because the university had just signed a license for Box, we ended up going with Box, which actually we found to be a lot more accessible and sort of more intuitive to use, and that's been the case across all of our partner countries as well, so we've been really happy with that. And then I've talked about the offsite scanning as well. Okay, moving on to a couple of other things. I'll take these slightly out of order, sorry. So we had China as a partner originally on our project, and unfortunately within the first 6 months they took the decision, or we sort of mutually agreed that they needed to withdraw from the project. One of the key reasons for that was to do with data sharing and data access. So our project, as I've said, is about gender-based violence. So, you know, like many of these projects, it's a sensitive kind of social issue. You know, and we never quite really got to the bottom of why it was, and we surmised that perhaps there was a sense that, you know, China did not want other countries, particularly the UK, particularly Western countries, kind of making judgments on them, which of course was never the intention, because this is a global issue. In fact, we are conducting our research in the UK as well, thanks to funding from our university. And we know it's an issue. We know it's an issue worldwide. However, there was a real reluctance. In fact, we were told that any data on this collected within China would not be released outside of China for analysis or reporting at all. So that kind of put a real block on us actually being able to progress the project with them. It wasn't the only reason, but it was pretty key in that decision that they had to withdraw. So that was unfortunate, but thankfully we were able to kind of progress well and on a slightly larger scale with the other countries as a result of that. And then moving on, I know we've kind of discussed some of the ethical considerations, but there were just a couple of ethical points that I did want to flag, and also just to share with you what I think is quite an innovative solution to one of those from our study countries. So our surveys that we've conducted in the quantitative bit of research that we've done, that I've talked about, it was assessing young people's exposure to violence and abuse. So as you can imagine, asked some quite difficult, quite challenging questions of young people. And for us, it was important that that was done completely anonymously in order to give young people the confidence that they could be completely honest with no kind of backlash coming from them completing this survey anonymously. However, particularly in the UK, in fact, because we have these very rigorous, you know, quite rightly, very rigorous safeguarding procedures in place, if a child discloses any type of abuse, you know, schools have to act on that quickly and to do something about it. So particularly in the UK, that caused a problem for us in being able to collect the data in the first place, because schools were just saying, look, if a child says that they've been abused and you can't tell us that that individual child has said something about it, then we're not kind of fulfilling our responsibilities towards those children, which, you know, isn't true, because we did have ethical considerations in place to make sure that children were being signposted to support and being encouraged to disclose anything that they had experienced through the right channels, whilst being very clear that whatever they disclosed within the survey would be completely anonymous. But interestingly, as a result of that, what it meant was that much more in the UK than compared to the study countries, it was a real barrier to them actually doing the survey in the first place, and hence our survey numbers were much lower in the UK than they were in the other countries. So I just thought that was quite an interesting point to flag. And then a final kind of, you know, big ethical consideration is related to that. You know, we need to make sure that we're signposting children to support if they're at risk of abuse. But in some of the low-income countries where we're working, they don't necessarily have well-established accessible structures in place for children to access the support that they need. And so, you know, the country research teams were coming back to us saying, well, what do we do if a child in a school in Uganda comes up to us and says, you know, this has happened to me? What do we actually do about it? Other than sharing a phone number with them, and they might not have a phone to be able to access that service. So in response to that, we were able to carve out a bit of our project funding to invite our country partners to come up with a proposed solution, at least in the short term, to provide that support that was needed when this data was being collected. And in India, that involved bringing in a consultancy organisation that could provide tailored counselling and support to children as research participants, but also to the research team, in fact. But in Uganda, they actually piloted a project for 6 months where they used social work students from our partner university, Makerere, to go out and provide social work and counselling support once a week in the schools where we were collecting the data. And that was very well received. It was great that they were able to do that. There's a report on our website about it, in fact, and they were able to remove a number of children from immediately harmful situations. So, you know, from that point of view, it was successful. So I appreciate it's slightly off topic in terms of management of the data, but it was an ethical issue that came up in the process of collecting the data, which we had to find a creative solution to. So that's why I just wanted to highlight it. But that was everything from me for now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ross. That was really interesting. And as I said, yes, if you feel that there's documents that you have, such as that guidance that you think is relevant for other people, add it on the Google Doc during the discussions with the URL, and then we can include it in the report. Right, and we move over to Chris Hill from the Breccia project. Chris? Do we have Chris on the call, Jay?
We do. I was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm afraid.
Okay.
I was having an interesting conversation with myself.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. So if you that's next slide. Bear with me a sec. Yes, I'm Chris Hill. I'm from the University of Southampton. The PI is Justin Sheffield. We're on a GROW project under GCRF, which is about training and research training and research within 3 countries, Kenya, Ghana and Malawi. And it's focused on water and food security, but also that strong element of research training, which obviously extends to research and research data management, of course. We've got African partners from 6 universities, regional partners, which are also sort of policy extension arm, some policy champions in LEAD and IIED, LEAD in Africa and IIED in the UK and Africa. And then we've got some training champions, SARIMA, which is a group in South Africa on research and innovation management. It's the sort of research administration issues, and a lot of that relates, of course, to things like data and library advice and guidance on data management planning. And then VTIA Group in the UK is about data research standards and validation. Next slide, please. So we're organised in around in 5 research themes around the water and food security research, and there are about it's ever changing, but 52 researchers on the programme, and they come from socio, environmental, biophysical, anthropological disciplines. So lots of different expectations of the sorts of data that they're going to need for the project, lots of different experience of data management and metadata and portals and accessing data and sharing data. The way we've organised the project, sorry to go back, the way we organised the project is, this is about research training at the heart of it. So the early career researchers, the PDRAs that have been appointed, become PIs in their own research programs. So we've set up under our program 28 small research projects that link either a African partner with a UK partner to develop a researcher to develop a small research project, which they have to take through the whole process of application and award. And as part of that process, they have to do a data management plan. They are encouraged to do a data management plan. Whether they've all finished that is another issue. And then the next stage will be to turn some of those, when they're completed, small research projects into large research projects, LRPs, which we're just discussing at the moment. And that's where particularly issues of data generated by the small research projects feed into the large research projects. So we need to know that the information coming out of the small research projects is secure, accessible and shareable, both within the project, but also ultimately outside the project. Next slide, please. I'll take these, no, I was going to take them in reverse order, but I won't. The data sharing within the project, is very similar to, I think, to the issues and challenges that have been described before. We started using Google Drive for many of the data sharing, but have moved subsequently to OneDrive and SharePoint as a basis, partly because of University of Southampton policy and just ease of access for our collaborators. But we are sharing quite large volumes of data, particularly where it comes to hydrological models and Earth observation data and other geospatial data, and things like vulnerability data, which is based upon national census variables. So that's now working effectively, and it's under the auspices of each SRP, each early career researchers project, to ensure that that's working, and then they feed back issues if they have any to the management group, and we seek to resolve those. As they build those collaborations themselves within their small research projects, they are asked to develop this data management plan, which means that they have to consider all the issues of data management themselves. So it forms part of the training of on research and research administration. So we've got all the projects, all 28, to develop, to input into a shared spreadsheet of their data needs and the data that they anticipate coming out, so we can at least track what the expectations of the project are. And then they've got to consider things like, data sharing, any embargo periods that they might want to put on the data before they publish as part of their SRP, issues of data preparation for archive and storage, things like security and data, and the sort of all of those projects have to go through ethics, so they consider the data and data security for sensitive data as well. Are they all in place? No, I'm afraid they're not. So we've increased the amount of training that we're giving on that, and we're starting to, and we would have been in Ghana this time well, this week, but where more training has would have been given, that's now been given online, so that's working well enough. And the development of the LRPs will bring us onto the next stage, I think, of how do we share outside the project team. Next slide, please. Because we're we're keen on making data as accessible as possible. A lot of this is geospatial data. It's of a place, so it's important. It's valuable and often completely irreplaceable in that sense. We are encouraging the SRPs, the small research projects, to think about publication. So treating data as a publication. So that gives it a DOI and a persistent identifier. But it's also, as they build up their SRP program and their data management plan, they have to think about, whose rules they need to follow. The funders, the institutional, so University of Southampton or their own institution. And here it brings in the policies and data management policies of the journals themselves. So you need certain levels of metadata in order to publish on, a shared data journal like Scientific Data. And it's great for, you get a citable reference. It's of value. We're encouraging that, and certain of the SRPs will certainly be able to do that. Some of our data is models. So again, trying to make sure that those are accessible, archived possibly, through things like GitHub or equivalents, SourceForge and other things. And then where a publication, where data supports a publication, we would be trying to use the journal archives for that. Increasingly, that is available. But that's for archiving. We've got other archives within the institutional archives using Pure in Southampton. And then, but that doesn't give access to, you can access data, you can find data and you can download it, but it doesn't manage that access for a wider use. So in that instance, we're developing a data portal. This will only come on stream when we start the larger research projects, when the outputs of the SRP, these small research projects, are ready. So that's to help data discovery and access more widely. It's to support the use of that data between the small research projects as they move to large research projects. And it's built on standards. It can probably be a GeoNetwork or a GeoNode. We've used GeoNetwork elsewhere, but it can store any of the data sets we need in a secure way with record level control on access and embargoes as we need. So I think that's probably it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris. There's some questions probably, but let me first do the Mentimeter questions that I have for this section, whilst people can type questions into the chat. So how do you handle personal data collected in research under GDPR regulation in your projects? So we have a lot of personal data collected locally, but not transferred to the UK, but also a fair amount of personal data being transferred under a GDPR data sharing agreement, are being collected by European researchers under GDPR rules. Okay, so that's interesting. And a second question, how do you store and share collected research data whilst the research is ongoing? And that's excellent to see. So it's the majority either have a collaborative platform that everyone can access in order to store, use, and exchange data, or every partner organization stores their own data and they can then be exchanged between partners when needed. That seems to be the majority. Thank you. Okay, before we move to the next session, let's have a quick look at what questions might have come in on the chat. Is each individual institution the sponsor for the project, or is it the UK? I would imagine that's for Chris. You fund 28 projects.
It's the individual lead organisation. So that might be a UK NGO, it might be the University of Southampton, but also that's distributed across all the national partners as well. So Ghana, Malawi, and Kenya. And then there are separate projects which are run by those regional organisations as well, which are drawing that cross-country and cross-theme activity together.
Yeah, okay. And I also have a question, well, two questions actually. What kind of data management plan template do you use? Do you use something like that looks like DMP Online, or do you use something that might come from NERC as a template? And a second question is, have data papers already been written? How many, or are they ongoing?
We point them to a data management plan template, DMP Online. We developed our own, partly because, well, built on a standard UKRI type of template, particularly from a BBSRC angle. But we've added some additional questions that we would like to know about. Are they already? No. There's a very there's been the early career researchers, when they as the PI putting in the proposal, had to write a very short piece on data management before they were evaluated. So this is all within the project funding, but they didn't have to write the sort of 2-pager data management plan that's typical of a project. So now they have to write a fuller document, but also maintain 2 spreadsheets as they go through their project, because it's all very well saying, well, we'll develop a data management plan, but you've got to keep records of the types of data that you're generating, because it's not all data that you'll end up wanting to share. There's lots of sort of intermediate processing that is also data that ultimately will not be shared. And obviously when you're in a project like this, which is using multiple sources of secondary data as well, you need to be clear that that's not your data and you won't be sharing it unless you've made certain arrangements to do so. So they maintain those spreadsheets as well, and so that people can easily see within the project what data sets are available and they might want to use in their own project. So for example, where we've got vulnerability mapping, where we're using census-based variables, those are valuable to all sorts of other organizations or other projects. There's no value in them repeating the data requests and collection and initial processing, for example.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, we'll move over to the next section, capacity building and data management across a partnership and working with partners with limited data management capacity. Angie, if you get your slides ready and for screen sharing, and if Jay, I'll stop sharing my screen, and Jay, you can help her share her screen. Then whilst that is being set up, I'll quickly respond to the other question that came in on GDPR. If local partners collect personal data, but they never come to the UK, should we look at GDPR? What we're doing in our project is that we indicate that local partners obviously need to abide with their own data protection regulations that might be in place. If the data are, the personal data are only handled locally and not by UK-based or European-based researchers, then GDPR doesn't apply. So then if the data never come to the UK, then we indeed do not need to consider them. But as soon as the personal data would also be used by UK researchers, then GDPR again needs to be looked into, needs to be applied. Okay, over to Angie.
Hi, can you see the screen? Am I sharing?
Yes. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm from the STRIDE project, which is Strengthening Responses to Dementia in Developing Countries. I'm the administrative project manager. That's not my title, it's just easier to explain it that way. So the STRIDE project aims to improve dementia care treatment and support systems so people living with dementia are able to live well, and family and other carers are not excessively burdened, both in terms of costs and their own health and quality of life. Linked to that is our core aim to build and strengthen capacity in the countries we're working with to ensure that they are able to respond to dementia issues after this within this project and after as well. So STRIDE is happening in 7 countries. We cover Brazil, India, Mexico, Kenya, Jamaica, Indonesia, and South Africa. We also have some linked projects that aren't funded through GCRF, but they're projects where we've developed collaborations and people have sought other funding to be able to use some of our STRIDE resources and methods to apply similar work in their own countries as well. STRIDE has a number of components. We have 10 work packages, and there's 6 that are core research work packages. Each country does a theory of change, for example, and each country is involved in a systematic review of dementia interventions. And there is a huge component of research training and development of research tools. The fieldwork and core data collection, the countries can do specific work packages. So we have work on a prevalence and impact survey, which is 2,000 households in Indonesia and South Africa. We're doing work on an awareness and anti-stigma intervention for dementia in Brazil and Kenya. And there's work on the costs and impacts of providing unpaid care. So this is care by family members for people living with dementia in India, Jamaica, and Mexico. At the moment, most of this work is on pause because of COVID and various countries in lockdown and other situations. So we're at the moment rethinking whether alternative methods could be used for some of the elements in the project, but in other cases, like the prevalence survey, that's on hold and will start when the countries are able to restart. This is just for information, a very simplified map of STRIDE, but it's probably not as simple as we think of it as being. But there's lots of different components, and they're sort of all sewn to get held together, I guess, with a research capacity work package and various tools and collaboration elements around that. Within the project, we have in each of the 7 countries, we have an academic research partner and an NGO partner. The NGO partner is an Alzheimer's association in the country. So in each of the countries, at minimum, we will have a senior researcher who's in charge of leading the work that the country is doing, an early career researcher, and that's part of our developing capacity program of work. And then we'll also have an Alzheimer's Association lead who brings the sort of practice and policy aspect into the project. And we also have policy advisors such as WHO and development banks involved in the project. So these were just some of the issues that have and challenges that have come up for us. A lot of what's been spoken about before has come up in the project as well. And so we've had issues around balancing the ownership of data for partners with our LSE institutional requirements for GDPR data management security policies. And there was a real concern, especially when GDPR was just coming in as we were starting, that the countries don't have the same requirement around GDPR. They're not, they're more flexible in the way that they deal with data management and data protection. And LSE was very concerned that the requirements that we have are sort of discussed and shared and then implemented across those countries. There's also been some balancing of cultural expectations in countries with institutional data requirements that we have, and that's just been a bit of trying to avoid looking like we're taking over. There's been, people have made comments about colonialism and things coming in as well, so it's just been trying to balance cultural expectations to avoid some of that. We've established processes for management, storage and access across the 6 research work packages, and 3 of them are collecting large amounts of research data. 8 countries, so the 7 developing countries in the UK, and then the 2 partner organisations in each, which have different levels of access needs, roles in terms of data collection and management and analysis, and try to do that by avoiding politics across that. We've also had another issue has been making sure that within the countries, academic partners and NGO partners don't feel like they're that anyone is more important than the other. Our project is very much about the NGO partners and the academics working together, and that's core for our impact plans. And so our priority has been to make sure that neither kind of feels like that they're more important or less important than others. And we've tried to translate that to the data management side to make sure that people feel that they have access to what they need, but they understand if they don't have access to something. Key considerations for us have been to be fair in the access and ownership. Ros was mentioning that the majority of her work packages have UK PI leads, and we have the same. So we have kind of priorities for them, but also the country teams are doing the data collection. It's been important for us to manage that and recognise the levels of contribution across countries in the work packages. We wanted to make sure that everyone that's collecting data has got some access and rights to use it after the project, so they're not just sort of consultants working for the UK team. And we also wanted to make sure that whatever we're sort of putting in place or supporting people in terms of infrastructure and training around data management are things that they then can take forward and use in other projects, and it's building their capacity, not just setting them up just for this project. And then just finally, to some of the approaches that we've put in place, we have a central shared storage arrangement for all the work packages and project elements. And so we use OneDrive, and all the research data is shared through that. And that's partly because it helps with institutional requirements to be able to manage and check on how data is being used and being able to audit around that. We have done lots of training on GDPR and data requirements for everyone. And I'm sure many of you have had this too, but it's been very difficult to even get our UK-based researchers to follow some of those GDPR requirements, especially when it was first coming in. So it's been interesting training people that don't necessarily have similar requirements in their own countries. We've got data sharing agreements in place. So the data agreements, they cover sharing and management and various other things specific to all work package activities and country partners. So at the last count, we had 22 in place, and we've got another 5 or 6 to set up. We have standard operating procedure manuals for all work packages specific to fieldwork and data collection. And we have ongoing support for partners on data issues, so they know they can just contact us or give us a call on WhatsApp or whatever if they want to raise any queries. And it's been important for us to make sure that there's some degree of flexibility and approachability to discuss issues. What we wanted to avoid saying is these are all our procedures, you have to follow them. If you don't follow them, you'll end up breaching contracts or something. So we've been very clear in trying to be flexible and approachable, and that's the sort of ethos of our project anyway.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Angie. I think I've got to stop you there. Hopefully, if that's okay, so we can still have Diego present as well, and we keep on track. Excellent. Thank you very much. Very interesting. So if people have questions or comments, put them in the chat box. And now I'll challenge Diego to go through his slides in 5 minutes. Diego.
Okay, good. So yeah, just go to the next slide. I'm not gonna stop too much. Hello everyone, my name is Diego Jufe. I'm a researcher and data manager in the United Nations Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Center in Cambridge, and we are managing the Development Corridors Partnership DCP project. This is a GCRF funded project. It started in November 2017, I think. I joined in April 2018, and it finishes in December 2021. The research question of this project is how can development corridors, so this is large infrastructure development strategies, be designed and implemented to deliver sustainable and inclusive resilient economic growth. And our approach is a research and capacity building collaboration to respond to this question. So at the same time that we have researchers in Kenya, Tanzania, UK and China interacting, we also have a very strong capacity building element. If you go to the next slide, please. So our data flows, and I can say a little bit more about our partners. So these are the countries where our data moves, and in the box you see what kind of data we are exchanging. We are 11 institutions, so including NGOs, research universities, NGO and government think tanks. So when I say government think tanks, I refer to China. We had the Chinese Academy for Agricultural Sciences, the National Climate Strategy Center from China, and the Chinese Academy for International Trade and Cooperation. So those are in a way they are linked to the Chinese government, and they somehow advise decisions on the Chinese government. That's why we call them think tanks. In Kenya, we are with the University of Nairobi and the African Conservation Center, which is a local NGO. And in Tanzania, we are with WWF Tanzania and Sokoine University of Agriculture. In the UK, it's University of York, University of Cambridge, London School of Economics, and us, UNEP WCMC, who are the project managers. So those are the data flows. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I'm just going to explain you our approach. So our approach is, it started with, let's write a data management plan in a collaborative way. Let's do it together. And that will tell us how we're going to do all of this across the project. So if you go to the next slide. So I structured this in 3 lessons because for me, it has been much as learning by doing. So I thought, okay, there's 3 lessons I learned. One is define and agree on the data management processes as early as possible with the partners. And to do that, I created, thanks for guessing there was the next slide. To do that, we had a workshop where we defined the 4 processes that the project is going to pivotate around. And through those 4 processes, we created a data management plan. And you can see here our contents of our data management plan, which touches on all the stuff we discussed in our workshop, where we agreed what are the things that our data management plan should do. If you go to the next slide, those 4 stages are design, which is all about planning before you collect the data. So this deals with all the ethical research processes and approvals with a GDPR data management plan. So what do you do before you go to the field? Process is how do you collect the data and process the data? Store, where do you put your data to keep it safe? So this is all about storing. And then share is not only how do you share with data within partners, but how do you use your data for effective and powerful communications? So if you go to the next slide, so this is kind of the lesson learned is do this with the partners and show them this image. How do we interact? So we have 3 levels of access: restricted access, which is the red one, which is in UNEP Database Institute servers. Not everyone can access. Then restricted group access, it's only people from the project, and that's SharePoint, which we use our data management system with files and most of the data. But then we have a very strong component of spatial data, and we chose to use ArcGIS because the GeoNode was a very steep learning curve for me, to be honest, and I was very familiar with UNEP ArcGIS. We have a license and we can share that license with partners. So we went to create an open data portal, and we have a website, of course, that's also data. So our website for us is also data, and we use that to disseminate through social media. So that's our data structure. And just a little bit more on the data portal. It's meant to store all the spatial data, but also tabular data that can be shared publicly. And with that, we can build web stories or link to social media or create story maps. We can talk about it, but it's not the purpose. Lesson 2 is to be very clear on what the project partners need to do and be very flexible about it. So if you go to the next slide, we tried to create decision trees for the partners. This was the one on research ethics. To make very clear to them what they need to do. The next slide, please. These are just examples. In terms of how do they store the data, for example, we explain them what we expect from them and what do we recommend, acknowledging that we can't force them to do things they don't want to do, but they have to comply with our regulations. And then I'm not going to read this table, but we also created from a checklist. What are your responsibilities on each of these processes? So they can have one table where they know what they need to do, and with notes and comments. So these are things to make it clear. And the lesson 3, it's all about engaging with them, as we've been discussing, and understand what their issues are, because there's lots of issues. And if you go to the slide, what we've done a lot is face-to-face meetings. So I went to the offices to all our partners, except for the Chinese partners, which we can discuss a lot about that, but it's been a challenge to interact with them, and discuss about the data needs, the data management plan, and kind of build the plan through them. So the plan didn't come into practice until almost a year and a half after the project has started. We have done webinars on data management and what other obligations. So all these images that I show you are just slides from our webinars. Attend to calls whenever they are needed, because there's lots of issues on having the right knowledge to access these resources, even having a laptop or even having enough internet. So lots of support on that. And then mediating on data sharing issues. We're trying to, when we are creating specific data sets, create terms of use for that data sets, and interact with the partners to agree on what are the conditions for this data set, how are you going to share it, etc., etc. So that's been quite quick.
Excellent.
But I hope that provides an overview, and I'm happy to share resources and things.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Diego. That was really interesting. I'll launch the final 2 questions, and then if people have questions, they can put it in the chat. So what kind of data management training have you provided to partner organizations abroad? That's just free text you can type in that will appear as bubbles of text, speech bubbles. So it just captures a lot of your responses. You're also welcome to add the topics, because there's a lot of people saying webinars, but what kind of topics have you then handled in those particular webinars or online training? Ethics, support with ethical applications. See what any other topics, encryption techniques, ethics training. Not a lot of topics I'm seeing here, but maybe you can discuss that in your group discussion as well, what type of data management topics you might have provided training on, HR practices. And then the last question, of which solution that your project has implemented are you the most proud? Again, a free text one. That's just one response you can give. So what are you the most proud of? Research ethics boards being set up by partners overseas, capacity building, preprints publications, the school-based social work pilot in Uganda, having written a data management plan. Metadata collection, ensuring cultural sensitivity, data security, decentralized process, etc. Good. Is there more responses coming in? Okay, I think we need to move on to start with the breakout groups. So I'm gonna, if people are still typing, the solution you're proud of, be quick, because when I move on, then I think you probably lose the screen there. Okay. So practical for the breakout sessions. So I'm still going to look at the chat as well whilst we take that short break, and we can come back to those questions maybe at the end during the wrap up. So take a short break, get yourself some water, some coffee, some tea, have a 5 minutes walk around, get some fresh air. In the meantime, Jay will transfer all of you to one of the breakout groups. There's 4 breakout groups. Each group will have a shared Google Doc with some topics, questions to discuss. You will see the link appear in the chat box once you're in your breakout group. One person will be facilitating the discussion, those people know that they are, and one person will be taking the notes as well. But everyone that feels that they want to add something to the notes or has interesting information or resources or something to add to the Google Doc, please, you can all type into the Google Doc. You all have editing rights. It doesn't have to be tidy typing. Bullets is fine. As said, afterwards we'll write all this up into a report. We'll tidy it up. Thank you all. I hope that was good discussions that you had in each of your groups. So let's see. Let's hear something from each of the groups very briefly on what you sort of discussed. Breakout group 1. Sorry, I haven't got the names here of who was leading breakout 1. Jay,
I think that was me. I'm Sarah.
Okay,
Hi.
Sarah.
Hello.
Okay, good.
So I'm not going to put my video on because I'm currently lurking outside because I have builders in my house and they're drilling. So this is a bit of an ad hoc situation I've got going on here. So things we talked about in our group. So in terms of the first question, we had around solutions to data management, multi-country projects, and security transfer, storage and sharing. There wasn't too much to add in terms of like maybe naming specific software or anything. We did have one mention of Nextcloud that was mentioned by one particular person that was useful as data sharing solution. But one thing that definitely came up is communication. So there was a lot of conversation around making sure communication across all partners is clear so that there's a coherent understanding. You know, particularly important obviously when working across projects, across countries, across different cultural expectations, that kind of thing. We also had a kind of a bit of a side conversation, I guess, but talking about the need to publicly disseminate data versus the need to publish those data first academically. So kind of timing issues there of what order do you do things in, how you want to get stuff out quickly, particularly for policy engagement and public engagement, but that might preclude academic publication further on down the line. So timing issues there and making sure you bring that into your conversations around data and how quickly you process those and when you get them out. Visibility was something that was mentioned as being key as well. So everyone having visibility across all partners of the data, and this was specifically mentioned in the context of publications and having a tracker, but that was something there. Whistle stop through the other ones. So strengthening capacity in data management, security and sharing was the next question. So people mentioned having series of training sessions for members so that the research team, data management ethics, that everyone can get involved in that. And it was mentioned that this is not often seen as enough of a priority, particularly making connections with data management experts in partner organisations. The links aren't always there. So that's something to consider. One suggestion that was made, and I know some projects already have this and some others don't, is having the one particular person to lead on data management. I think that's kind of a shooting for the stars kind of thing for some projects perhaps, but yeah, having one person on a program to lead on data management is really useful to help drive things forward and field queries. And so I'll just pick something from the third section before I stop talking. So one thing that was made really useful from Rose, I worked with her at the University of Cambridge, is that when you're handling requirements of UK research funders for data sharing with different contexts and understandings in the countries you work with, starting with the collaboration agreement that you drew up can be a really good starting point to kind of make sure that there's the understanding there amongst everyone. There was some talk of research funders' expectations not always being clear to us in the programs ourselves. So that need to kind of go through and look at all the documentation you've already drawn up can be a useful starting point. And various members of our group, of course, did signpost to like the ESRC and various research councillors and the guidance they have on their website. Yeah, a big one was making it clear. Okay.
Okay, lovely, thanks. Hopefully that's all in the notes as well. Great. Group 2, was that Nick, or who was leading Group 2, facilitating?
Yeah, that's me. Yeah. To unmute myself. Yeah, so our first question, were they all the same, first question around additional solutions anyway?
There was two. The first question was the same across all the groups, and then Group 1, there was 2 versions of questions. So you got different questions from Group 1.
Again, we've talked, you know, that we'd already covered a lot of that already in terms of sort of SharePoint and Google Drive. I mean, there were a few discussions around managing access and sort of IT issues within institutions, you know, in terms of SharePoint in particular for one colleague, and Google Drive as well. There were specific issues around there. So again, just in terms of, you know, managing that with your IT department and communication around that and how that actually works with external partners, especially international. You know, in some ways, people felt that sometimes universities are more focused on the internal processes rather than external, and that can be quite difficult, which I think we found at Leeds as well, which is why we went for glass cubes, or my colleagues went for glass cube. Yep. One other solution that did crop up was Amaya, I think, mentioned that Basecamp can actually integrate with SharePoint, so there's some interesting discussion there. Mm-hmm. Then in terms of question 2, ours was, how could GCRF or institutions best support those people tasked with data management responsibilities? It kind of segued into the next question, but perhaps trying to recommend a particular approach, you know, that we could actually take to IT or to the institution, because often you're fighting a battle within your institution, and if you've got something to point out with, you know, specific recommendations that this is the way things should happen, whether it's ethics or software or, you know, requirements for software, whatever it may be. And a bit of a sense, I think, that we're all reinventing the wheel a little bit. You know, so something like China, we're all faced with the same issues with data sharing with respect to China, and we're all having to do it sort of independently within our own institutions and across the projects. Comments as well around guidance for folk with no or limited access to the internet. So again, you know, perhaps that's in terms of reinventing the wheel. We're all doing the same sort of thing. So that kind of segued into question 3, which resources, guidelines or recommendations could GCRF provide to future projects? So yeah, in terms of what we've already said, in terms of recommending particular approaches, standardising ethics processes, perhaps, again, that's very difficult across universities, but one colleague was talking about how they were, you know, just sharing their ethics process, or somebody might say, yeah, we've got an ethics process, you know, how do you try and standardise those across different institutions? Some discussion as well about ethics post-COVID, you know, so if you're working with India, for example, when can researchers go back into the field ethically? Yeah. And, you know, then perhaps, I mean, more broadly, how COVID is affecting this. I think we're having to become more familiar with this type of technology, which in some ways is positive. Well, in many ways is positive. But then, you know, how do you go about perhaps collecting data in different ways, and ethical guidance around things like Zoom, you know, in terms of recording voices or video. So, you know, perhaps there's a whole other raft of ethical issues there. We didn't really get time. Our countdown was, it was going all Falcon heavy at that point. So okay. The question 4, yeah, I mean, the people did mention various bits and pieces throughout, so hopefully we can add those to the document as we go.
Excellent, thank you. Third group, Vicky?
Hi, yes. We didn't per se go through each question one by one, but we had a general discussion and a lot of the points were actually covered. We had quite an interesting kind of point about some projects are looking at primary data, other projects potentially are looking more at secondary data, and the secondary data in particular may rely on the partners accessing and getting permissions to access the original data. And how can we do that? You know, we need to make sure we do that in an equitable and fair and collaborative way. And there's this risk potentially that, you know, the UK partners may be seen as data mining and just basically saying, sending them out to collect, getting them to collect the data, and then saying, all right, and you must share this with us. And, you know, it takes a lot of energy, I guess, and investment and time to sort of build the trust with the partners, because certainly from my project's perspective, one of our partners, I guess, has experience previously where they've had collaborative partners from the UK and effectively felt that they've just, you know, helicoptered in, taken their data and then helicoptered out, and, you know, we want to make sure that we're helping them as well, not just teaching them how to collect data, but actually making sure that they have ownership as well. So we had, yeah, quite a lot of discussions about how we can ensure that the data processes are kind of good practice, really, not so much telling them this is what you should do, but kind of, you know, sharing good practice. There's quite a lot of difference between different partners on how they, for example, back up their data. There's a risk, you know, where backups aren't done on an automatic or regular basis, that data can be lost, as we're all aware of. But how do we encourage the partners to ensure that they have backups so the data doesn't suddenly disappear if a laptop is stolen or a hard drive is lost? And I think the solution is really just ensuring that we communicate regularly, emphasising the importance of that. We've had sort of feedback that people have regular meetings, maybe every 2 months or every quarter, to highlight the importance of backing up data and keeping it secure. There was a comment about how there's sometimes fragmentation of data, and it's quite reliant on the in-country partners to do the translation, and how can we make sure that that data is then shared across the partnership. We also talked about the ethical issues, and how different standards may be across the board, even not just across the countries, but even within countries. So in our UK partners, they have different standards, it seems, depending on what kind of what board is actually doing the review of the ethics applications. Mm-hmm. And something that I raised was how actually, for example, we have partners in Vietnam, a country which has managed the COVID outbreak very, very well. And they are, they've had 200 cases, 0 deaths, and they are literally back to normal. We've had meetings with them where they're sitting all in one room, shoulder to shoulder. There's no social distancing because they've got it under control. And the ethics boards have confirmed that they're happy for research to continue, for them to go out and collect data, doing face-to-face interviews. Meanwhile, we're supposed to be, according to the funders, we're supposed to have parallel ethics both in the UK and in country. And in the meantime, in the UK, we have seriously not got COVID under control, and our ethics boards are saying, no, you can't do face-to-face collection, data collection. But obviously that, well, not obviously, presumably that refers to UK research, mm-hmm. But nonetheless, if they are saying across the board there's no data to be collected, how can we, in an equitable manner, say to our partners, actually, you're not allowed to collect data because you haven't got ethics on the UK side?
That's a bit paternalistic, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is something I have actually raised with Alex Bittle, who I see is actually on the call. So I don't know if she would like to say something whilst we have everyone here. It would be quite helpful to get your feedback, Alex. Lexi, sorry.
Hello. Yes, so I have actually escalated this up to the UKRI central team that look at ethics. I guess because from our point of view, we completely see where you're coming from, and it does seem slightly ridiculous that UK ethics boards would be putting a stop to data collection overseas, where obviously the restrictions are less than they are here, because we are now all in a different situation. But at the same time, I think suggesting that we can do away with that term and condition on the awards that requires parallel UK and overseas ethics, I think might set a dangerous precedent. So I'm just checking with them on what their advice would be, and I'm hoping that there will be a way forward, and that overseas partners can continue to do their work, because obviously with the situation as it is, it seems silly for them to be sitting around waiting for the UK to come out of lockdown, because who knows when that will be. I
see Diego raises his hands. Yeah,
I wanted to add to that. So what we did is we created a questionnaire, kind of a monkey survey for all partners around responses to COVID. So questions like, are you able to do your research? What are the restrictions in your country? What are your limitations right now? Are you working from home? Do you need internet? Do you have, all sorts of questions. And based on that questionnaire, we made decisions about how to manage this. And in Tanzania, they're back to the field. And we're not stopping them. It's their regulations. It's their, it's what's, that's happening. But in Kenya, they cannot do cross-county research, apparently. But yeah, the first thing was a questionnaire asking them, how is the situation affecting you right now? And then using that to make decisions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm quickly going to report still on group 4 that I joined in, that I facilitated on the discussion we had. So here impressed to hear that there's certain field work going on in India, where the data goes straight to a cloud-based database from the tablets that are being used in the field. That was quite impressive to hear. So we had a bit of a chat about systems and how they work and where they give limitations at times, signals not being reliable, etc. Some projects indicating that they probably could do more capacity building on data management, that was at times being overlooked. Compliance at times being difficult, especially if local countries don't need it. Secondary data was mentioned, that there could probably be guidance from GCRF on that, on how to or from institutions, how to process, how to keep track of secondary data, archiving guidance, etc. Suggestion made that universities' research offices can often help really well with data management aspects for GCRF projects, such as due diligence, data management plans, etc. There was suggestion made that GCRF could give guidelines on capacity building, how capacity building could be handled, or the suggestion being made to projects to make sure to address capacity building also in terms of data management. And project could also look at what might be available and working in particular countries, what capacity might exist there locally that could be tapped into. There was also discussion on, do projects have a dedicated data management, yes or no? At times, data management wasn't particularly addressed in the early stages of a project, and then people are now trying to mop up and try to catch up on what might be a slight mess of some of the data that researchers have collected. Okay, that sums up that. So. If people still want to raise things, please do. Everyone is allowed to speak, I think, at this stage. If anyone wants to say something, we've sort of covered all the areas, and I said we'll be writing up and sharing with you everything that was discussed. If you still want to add things that you feel you want to say to the chat box, you can. We'll capture all that information as well. But if anyone wants to speak to the group, please do.
Before we close, Veerle, can I just make a couple of points? I've added all the links to the Google Docs, so notes were taken, but if there's something that you wanted to raise and there wasn't time, because I realised that the breakout sessions were quite short and everybody was in mid-flow as they had their 1 minute countdown. So if there were some key things that you wanted to share, any linked resources, or just a kind of burning point that you wanted to make, feel free to go into the Google Doc, link to your breakout session, and we'll incorporate those notes into the report. And also there will be the customary evaluation going around, so I'll make sure that's in your inboxes either today or tomorrow. But yeah, I will leave it open for any final questions before we close.
If no one else has anything to say, I just wanted to say thank you to you all for organizing it. I thought it was brilliant and really well done, and actually the most complicated meeting with lots of people I've ever seen so far. So that was really helpful as well. So thank you.
Complicated in a good way, I hope, Marla.
Yeah, just like lots of people in the breakout rooms, and yeah, that was really well done.
Yeah, and also the Menti quiz answers that everyone gave in were also great about the solutions that they're implementing and things like that. I don't know whether the webinar topics ever came up. Maybe you could share the Menti results as well.
Yeah, that will be part of the report indeed. Yeah, that's why we were capturing it. Yeah, so that we can share it afterwards. Yeah.
No,
you want to mention anything quickly, because you are planning to run a couple of short 1 hour training sessions on specific things. We haven't quite kind of finalised the dates or circulated those amongst the team, but it is something that we have in mind that we'll be doing in the coming weeks that we can.
Yeah, in the initial workshop, we were going to have an afternoon session with some training on GDPR and also on preparing data for metadata, preparing data for sharing and archiving. That sort of comes from the second hat that I had at the UK Data Archive, because I've actually just changed jobs again on that part. So, but the idea is that we still run those as webinars in mid-July, I think. Yeah, Jay, we'll send around information on that. Yeah.
So, well, you're planning to make those publicly available
to the Grove. To the Grove.
Yeah, we'll advertise. Yeah, we'll advertise when these take place. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
That's us
See
done.
this. Yeah. Okay. If nobody else has anything further to say, then I think Jay, you can probably. I see there's still some things coming in on the chat box. It's mostly thank you and bye bye. So then I think Jay, you can close the session, and thank you all very much.
Yeah, very quick.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it, and it could have been longer, but I didn't want to make it too long, but for a Zoom. But yeah.
Thanks everyone. Nice to meet you.
And thanks all for those that presented. Yeah, and good to see faces.
Thank you. It was very useful. Thanks.
Thank you. Well organised. Well done, you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.